Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits, universally known as Oi, who are you? Well, as you know, we're currently in the process of celebrating Musical Talk's 10th anniversary. It took place last October, and we had a number of celebratory programmes at that time. But we also said we would occasionally touch more on the history of Musical Talk over the course of this year. So, if you like, we're having a year-long party. Now, I thought it would be really interesting to find out more about the early days of Musical Talk and how it came to be, what the plan was, how it was expected to operate, things like that. So, I have here in front of me, as you can probably hear, some of the original documents which helped set up Musical Talk. Now, you may or may not be aware that the whole reason Musical Talk came to be, according to this paperwork, is because of the late Julian Slade. Now, as you know, Julian Slade was the writer of one of the greatest British musicals of the 20th century, Salad Days, and he unfortunately died in June 2006. But one of the clauses in his will stipulated that much of his legacy should be spent on the creation of a radio documentary series on the past, present and future of British musical theatre, and should operate in perpetuity, recording, archiving and preserving conversations and discussions on that subject. And looking a bit further at the paperwork, I can see that the executors of Julian Slade's will, that's Lord Lloyd Webber and Sandy Wilson, very commendably wasted no time at all in setting up the Foundation for British Musical Theatre Broadcasting, which had its inaugural meeting in September 2006. It was a meeting of the great and the good of British musical theatre. I can see several signatures on its original charter of famous composers such as George Stiles. There's Anthony Drew. And I can even see our own Nick Hudson's name there, although it does appear to have been crossed out. But anyway, this initial document for the foundation also records the discussion at that meeting about how to make the late Julian Slade's wishes come true. How could they create a regular, perpetual documentary series about musical theatre in Britain? Well, they very quickly realised that the way forward was a podcast, and so hastily the name Musical Talk was created and the appropriate website was set up. All they now needed was somebody to host that show. Well, there was of course only one man for the job, but sadly he wasn't available, so instead they went to Nick Hudson. And if you don't believe me, it is all here in these documents which I've got out of the National Archive at Kew. Hang on. So I'm just looking at this page here. This is the list of signatories. You know, I'm not sure about this document. Why would Lord Lloyd Webber write his name in crayon? Hang on a minute. This is fake news. That means that entire story is completely made up. So if all that's nonsense, then how did Musical Talk come to be created? Well, I went back to the originator of the Musical Talk brand and long-term presenter, Nick Hudson, and he and I had a long chat about how Musical Talk came to be. So let's hear that now. Musical Talk. This, of course, is our 10th year of Musical Talk, and it's quite...
Good night, everybody.
I see you've been plugged into the adrenaline machine, so you should be excited about this, but I think it might be quite interesting to talk about some of the thoughts that went round your head at the very beginning of this programme.
You mean 3 minutes ago? At the beginning of this programme? Or
I see what you mean, yes, right. No, I mean at the beginning of a series of programmes. Yes. Right, okay. I'd like to think of it as one conglomeration. But
that would be a long listen, wouldn't it, if you were to combine every single episode of Musical Talk into one file?
I would assume it would be something like 500 hours. In fact, as most episode average at about that hour, don't they? But I wanted to talk to you about, really, the beginning of the show, how it started. What were you thinking? I know you've touched on some of this before, but I've never sat down and spoken to you about it. So in this 10th year anniversary, let's briefly cast your mind back if we can. What were your impulses? I mean, we're talking September 2006 was the very first episode. Had you been thinking about it for a long time before you actually made that first episode, or was it a little bit spur of the moment impulse kind of creativity? How did it come about as you remember it?
I had been listening to podcasts, specifically coasterradio.com, whom we have mentioned over the years on this show, as one of the big changes in my life when I discovered what a podcast was, because I always wanted to be a radio presenter when I was young, and I did stuff for school. I did radio shows for school. I often did parties, and I was a little bit of a DJ, like DJ Hudson on the decks, yeah? And
sorry, what was that last? Was that
DJ
Dex?
Hudson on the decks.
Yes, I don't think you pronounced Dex quite clear enough to clear up the reputation issue there.
And I wanted to... I've said this before, there was no British musical theatre podcast.
But you were interested in musical theatre already by that stage. So really, in a way, it's almost a fusion of your interest in the radio medium in whatever form and your love. Well, we didn't know each other at this stage, so we are talking,
Yeah.
I joined on episode 18.
Did you?
Yes, so with a discussion about pantomime. So, as always.
Gilbert and Sullivan.
that came later. But really, we are talking about you and your friend Andy, who was a performer and actor. But you said you had this idea then. So you love musical theatre. You'd spotted there was a gap in the market, shall we say.
Well,
what made you think that you were the man to fill it?
I remember Andy had just moved to London to be in the producers, and he sent me a message on MySpace, which was like the Facebook of the time.
It was indeed, yes, quite. Gosh.
Even Musical Talk was on MySpace, I seem to remember. And he saw I was a composer and I love musicals, and he obviously wanted to meet up and have a chat. And I met him. He showed me round the Theatre Royal Drury Lane the day I met him. I saw him in the producers that night.
So when was this? Was this in September?
August.
So it's the summer of 2006. So funny enough, I always assumed that you'd been a lifelong friend to Andy.
We met but we had a good rapport.
Yeah, immediately, clearly.
And we were two blokes that liked musical theatre.
Yes.
And he came round one day to hang out, and I think we wanted to look at some songs or something. And I
that old excuse.
Yeah, I literally said, let's try and do a podcast and talk about musicals. He went, okay. He didn't know what a podcast was, but I just said it's just like a radio show. We talk about musicals, and that was it.
Right, so at this stage you hadn't set up any domain or anything like that.
No,
this was this was almost spur of the moment with a friend.
I think I talked to Mike from Coaster Radio about how you put a podcast online, and we looked up the company we use. And I remember then and there, Andy very kindly set it all up.
He was a bit of an IT whiz, is he?
No, he paid a little bit of money for the setup process. And we put the episode up. It went on iTunes, and I mean, it was terrible, the first episode. You can go back and listen to it. I think Andy calls it theatre talk at some point and things, and he says that's what I told him it was called, but I don't agree with him. And I still to this day think Musical Talk is one of the best names I've ever come up with for anything, because
it works.
Yeah.
It's absolutely what it is, and I think it's very catchy.
Yes.
But let's just talk about that first episode then. So he had essentially actually come round to do something else, to talk with you about music and just have a nice afternoon, or whatever it was.
And it was great for Andy, because he had the daytime free.
Yes, of course, being a performer.
So we would make a regular thing of him coming round every Wednesday, and I would say, today we're going to talk about lighting. He'll go, okay, let's talk about lighting we like. And today we're going to talk about dance, because he knew about dance. So it's kind of a subject a week. That's how I kind of wanted it to be. But it was, as I've always said, to get a complete twist of fate, and for me to be friendly with Stephen Schwartz also at that time, because Wicked was coming to London. Through nothing to do with Musical Talk, through Stephen Schwartz, he and I had agreed to spend a morning together.
For what purpose? Just to meet?
Just to hang out. And
Gosh.
He was going to do an interview about Godspell for a David Essex documentary, so I chugged along in the car with him, and we went round town and stopped off somewhere and had a drink. And the barman was so excited to meet Stephen Schwartz, he gave us our drinks on the house, which is quite nice.
Wonderful.
And I said to him, oh, would you mind, I had a little crappy personal recorder on me, and I said, do you want to do an interview for my little podcast? He went, yeah, sure.
That's extremely generous of him.
Yeah,
I mean,
previously when working with Stephen's publicist or whatever it was, I said I'd like to do an interview with him about Wicked. He said, no, you have to go to the Wicked press office and things like that. And Stephen said, oh, just ignore that. let's just
Well,
let's
if you've got an in to the actual person themselves, gosh, that's
that
quite
really
an amazing
helped,
thing.
I think. And then I got a knack for kind of hassling people and getting them to come on the show.
Well, let's talk about that in a minute, because I think one of the great successes of the show, and indeed one of its foundations, is the fact that actually it had an incredibly starry rota of guests very quickly. But actually, I want to go back to that very first episode, first of all.
Oh, do you?
Now, yes, I do, and I can see your face is telling me that it's not the first thing, and it's not the thing you love most, and I understand. I look back on my earlier episodes, or more importantly, I listen back to my earlier episodes.
Like last week. Oh, it's terrible.
And I do find that, we've all learnt how to do this much better. We've all learnt how to become better interviewers. We've learnt how to broadcast. There are things we've all learnt. That's fine. But that very first episode, you were gifted in a way. Once again, it seems to me that all the stars were in alignment at the same time.
Literally.
Yes, actually, literally, you're right. Because you're right, Wicked had opened, or was in the process of opening. Adina Menzel was being mentioned everywhere. She was very much the name. It seemed to me at least, that there was a kind of popular enthusiasm amongst younger people. I see what I've done by accident there. But there seems to have been a kind of sort of a youth culture thing going on, which I don't detect so much now in musical theatre. People were interested in Wicked. I can't remember if High School Musical had happened yet or not, but it was certainly in the process of happening if it was. These are all things which are connected. These were the kind of musicals that suddenly people who were 14, 15, 16, 17 were talking about in a way that I don't hear anyone talking about.
Everyone was talking about Wicked.
They were indeed.
It was, when I went to that second preview, it still remains one of the most electrifying performances
in your mind.
In my mind.
Yeah. And did you go on your own or with Andy?
No, I went with a completely random friend of mine.
Nicely put.
And we, from my school days, he was a musicals fan as well, and we hadn't seen each other for 15 years or something.
Oh, right.
And we just met up and
went to Wicked.
The last 2 tickets for Wicked for that Saturday matinee.
Gosh, you were lucky.
And she didn't fly, and we talked about that in the episode with Andy.
But Andy hadn't seen it.
I don't think I can't remember.
So I suppose in that first episode, did you say to yourselves, let's talk about Wicked? Or was it actually, let's just talk about musical theatre, and Wicked became the first significant item that you spoke about?
I think Wicked was the thing at the moment. So if we were to do a first episode now, School of Rock would be the thing of the moment, because it's the show that, obviously Wicked was a much bigger force.
But it's the show that was advertising it was opening, and people, the word of mouth was working on it. Yeah, it's quite.
And Andy knew people in it and things like that. So the fun thing about Andy was he knew someone in every single show in the West End.
It's a tight-knit community, isn't it,
yes.
being a performer in the West End?
I think we even sat down one day, not on a podcast, we just went through every single show, and I said,
who do you know
in this? And he was able to list every single, whether it was a wiggy or a sound person or an ensemble member or the star. It was, he really helped Musical Talk.
Oh yes, so he's an unsung hero, isn't he?
He knew what he was talking about.
So I should say that again. He's an unsung hero.
He is.
Sorry, I think I said an unsung zero, which sounds very different. I don't mean that, Andy. I mean an unsung hero, which is ironic as you sing sometimes.
Andy knew what he was talking about. I didn't. I just knew how to put together a radio show. I had an interest, but he really knew. I was a person, I would say, let's talk about this. And he would go, okay. And he would possibly research the subject.
Or know about it.
Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting dynamic, but it's quite successful, actually, because you said that you were the one who came up with, in those early days, this episode's going to be about this episode's going to be about that. So you were the program coordinator or the content designer or manager in that sense. And he was the person who was the expert that you were asking questions about, essentially. Because for the first 10 or 15 episodes, that's pretty much the model, isn't it? There were one or two other people I think you started bringing in. But certainly those
It was either that or interviews. I remember we had Jared Alessandrini from Forbidden Broadway or Corey English that Andy did from the producers and things like that. Nice, and Stephen Schwartz, of course, nice surprises that we're able to.
Well, it also varies the content, doesn't it? Because actually, if it was week in, week out, let's talk about a different aspect of theatre, that would be fine, but it would get a reputation for just being a nuts and bolts kind of episode.
There's only so many things you can do when it comes to talking about aspects of theatre.
Yes. No, I think that's absolutely true. So, Stephen Schwartz was the first interview, and he was... Which episode was that? That's
Number
2 or 3, isn't it? It's right at the beginning. And then, how did you get to meet the Forbidden Broadway gentlemen?
Just emailed them.
Really? So this was the first of your scattergun approach.
Because
May
I was
we
able
talk
to
to you?
say we've had Stephen Schwartz on.
Yes.
That really opened the doors. I mean, maybe it didn't. Maybe, Gerard is a lovely guy and he wants to have a chat.
But it doesn't hurt having someone famous in the bag already, does it? No.
But it also doesn't hurt that performers and theatre people like to talk about their products and the art, which is always a good sign for us. And I very rarely had people decline interviews because it's not in their business model.
No, I agree. Also, fun enough, I concur with that absolutely, because one of the great pleasures to me is arriving and being considered as a journalist, but leaving being considered as an expert. That sounds a bit poncy, and I don't mean it to sound self-aggrandising, but actually a lot of actors realise that when they're meeting the press just want 2 or 3 lines. What was your most embarrassing moment? What's it like hanging on the Kirby wire? Whatever the questions are. They've heard them 1,000 times before. Well, if you're interviewing Bonnie Langford on Peter Pan, for example, you will get... She'll have had that question a million times.
The foy wire.
Yes, I know, but I'm using the old-fashioned term and still the popular usage. But quite often, I find, after about 5-10 minutes of conversation, when you've made some reference to some obscure musical from 1937 that they're aware of too, you can see the scales fall from their eyes and they suddenly realise they're talking to someone who knows what they're talking about, who's more one of them than they are not one of them. And then actually people really open up. So I think if you listen to quite a lot of interviews, after about 5 minutes you hear people relaxing and then you get the best out of them.
And for me, to go in as a member of the press and leave as a friend is really a life-changing aspect for me.
I've never stayed for breakfast, Nick.
No, but I've become friends with so many important people in the theatrical world. Mike Dixon, for example, huge person. Jonathan Cohen, even the likes, Adam Menken and Bill Brown. They are,
they're on your Christmas card list.
Yes. I've now met every single, apart from Seth MacFarlane and possibly Cameron McIntosh, I've interviewed every single person I could ever wish to on this podcast.
When did you do Andrew Lloyd Webber?
I've interviewed every single person I could ever wish to on this podcast.
Oh, I'd love to talk to Andrew Lloyd Webber, because I think I tell you what I find fascinating about him is that sometimes when he's good, he's absolutely fabulous. And sometimes when he's not, he's absolutely not fabulous. But my word, he loves theatre and he deserves our respect. So there will be a fantastic conversation to be had with him. If you're listening, Andrew,
clap your hands.
So taking us back to that first episode then, fine. So it really was about Wicked because Wicked was the thing, the zeitgeist of the moment.
I think we talked about the how do you solve a problem like Oliver.
It was
Joseph
Maria, I think,
at
actually.
that time as well, I seem to remember, because that was also the big thing at the moment. Well, back then.
At that moment, yes, quite.
But it's amazing how musical theatre... And
it had a much higher profile musical theatre at the time.
Now in 2016, I think the West End is...
Dull.
It
is, I agree with you, yes. It's very small C conservative.
Yeah, I mean, I asked on Facebook today, what do you want to talk about? And we had 2 answers, so thank you for the people that responded. One was European musicals, like Tance de Vampire and all the big, huge shows happening in Europe. The other thing was Murder Ballad.
Oh, right, okay.
Which I haven't seen.
And hasn't come to London.
It's sort of playing, I think, at the Arts Theatre.
Is it? You're right, it is.
Yes.
Forgive me, I went to see Apocalypse Cruise Ship Love Affair
nice.
Above the Arts. And you're quite right, Murder Ballad was playing beneath.
But I
do apologise.
It's got Dame Kerry Ellis and things in it, so that's a popular fan favourite. But
it's not setting the world alight, though,
just
if I may say.
appeal to me.
Well, I had forgotten about
Aladdin was the last exciting thing I saw.
You see, for me, that's too much of a franchise.
Yeah.
I'm quite happy to see Aladdin as a panto.
Of course. And one would argue this is a very expensive panto, but that's another discussion entirely. So there was much of a buzz about musical theatre back in 2006.
Yes, and I remember that. Things seem to be happening a lot as well. Pre-crash, of course, so we can't underestimate the fact that money has stopped.
Lots of things.
Well, that's true, but money is certainly tighter for everyone. But let's get back to those very first episodes. So you discussed with Andy Wicked, principally in that first episode, plus other stuff that was going on. Then there were some interviews immediately, very early on. Here's a question then. When did you start getting feedback from people? Did you get any sense that people were listening?
We got more feedback back then than we ever do now, which is really interesting.
Is that because we had a website where you could actually have a forum?
No, it was... people would email Andy a lot, often proposing and...
Things to talk about? Or proposing marriage?
Proposing, literally.
You're joking, really?
No, Andy got some...
Good Lord. His voice comes over well on radio then, doesn't it?
Very interesting emails. Makes you wonder what I'm doing wrong. But, people just don't...
Note to self, go X directory.
People just don't respond nowadays. I mean, they do on Twitter and Facebook and stuff, but
Well, there's a plethora of things. If we were the first,
Yeah.
and I have to say, I know for a fact that over the 10 years, there's been a number of other British-based musical theatre podcasts which have come and have been very good, but they've all gone again. We're the only ones still standing. But we were the first at the beginning, and we're the last at the end, in a strange sense.
There is one recently that's cropped up called In the West End. I think I'll have to check my sources, but
that's not just musical theatre, though, is it?
No, that's just
quite
the
theatre
West
in
End.
general. Yes, quite. And long may they prosper. I
Yes.
think we're a pluralist society. I think we should have everyone doing it. But
And I still want to do drama talk. I still want to do opera talk. I still want to do
cinema talk, yes,
cinema talk and talk.
So please do put yourself forward if you're interested in helping us with any of those.
It's good to talk. I'm trying to think of the early episodes. I mean, we had Dominic Lindsay Beaton, the man with many names, came on and talked about the Salonga and stuff and his.
Well, let me
Philippine
ask the
roots
question then, because actually, this is the point I wanted to talk about. That yes, you've got a mixture of you're expert in theatre, Andy, plus let's talk about theatre. You've got occasional big name interviews, but that is not going to, even that's not going to sustain you for 10 years. So how did you did you make a conscious decision to start bringing other people in and thinking, I need a wider pool of people? Or was it just, oh, I'm going to talk about this and I know someone who knows about that? Because
that one.
Right, because Dom is, and currently is, a very successful producer of drama in every sense. So he's a man of the theatre in many senses. And you knew him.
Theatre 6 have just announced to play with Paul McGann going on UK tour, which is very exciting.
Fantastic.
So congratulations to them.
So so really you weren't building up a repertory of people
it just all happened by accident, really. It was mostly me and my friends having a talk in my room about musicals. Just happened to have a microphone in front of us. There's nothing new, and that's how it came to be. And I think.
So how long did you think it was going to last? Did you think I'm just going to do this for a while until I stop being interested in it, or did you think actually no, but I'm going to make something of this for 5 years or 10 years or 50 years or whatever? Did you just not think about the future at all?
I didn't have a future plan for it. I just thought, well, I had a lot more free time back then, so I thought, what are we going to talk about this week? And I'd edit it and put it online.
Can you remember the lessons you learned from those early episodes then? Because you do wince a bit when you talk about the first one, but we have all learned. How quickly did you realise what you should and shouldn't be talking about? And
I haven't learned at all.
Very good.
I've learned about audio quality.
Yes.
I've learned about
production techniques.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've learned that not every episode has to have a guest. I've learned not every episode has to be an hour long, because that was always the aim. We have to get to an hour because people want an hour's worth of content. And I've learnt that possibly to be a bit more careful about what you say.
I think we've all learned that.
I've learnt if you can't say anything nice, possibly don't say it.
I'd like to really emulate that. That's fine, because that's a rule by which I now very thoroughly live in Edinburgh, for example. I think it's relatively fair game to give a full and honest review of the big shows in the West End. We've said before, Andrew Lloyd Webber is such a success that if we don't much like Love Never Dies, it's not going to hurt anyone, and lots of people do like it and lots of people love it. The smaller shows and other shows, certainly in Edinburgh, if I don't like a show, I won't interview the person afterwards, because it's not fair, because someone will love it, even if the only person who loves it is the person who wrote it. So
he'll probably hate it as well.
Well, we have a much more positive approach as a programme now. We're very much more up and about encouraging the arts and encouraging people to see things. I don't think we were ever negative particularly. I don't think we ever deliberately put the boot in, but I do think that we have a much better ethos. And I think that came quite quickly.
What I have learnt is it's more behind the scenes thing when it comes to dealing with, I mean, you don't do this as much, Thos, but I do, because we have different styles of show that we like to see. I like to see the big West End extravaganzas.
You're a spectacular man!
And I have learnt how to deal with PR companies, and I have learnt how to deal with press companies. I have learnt how to request interviews, request press tickets, and there is a bit of an art to that, because I think there are so many blogs and
blaggers.
Yes, blaggers and bloggers.
Yes.
That's a good name for a website. I think, these companies are getting very, very... I mean, there's outroar that the National, for a short time, are only offering single press tickets.
Yes, they got into the national papers. I was reading about that in one of the qualities. And
I've learnt how to deal with that side of things. And I think it's worked out really well, because now we get asked to shows, and we'll happily go and review them. I'm now close with all the big theatrical PR companies in London representing all the major shows, which is a skill I never thought I would be able to do. Here's a behind-the-scenes story. I mentioned Seth MacFarlane earlier. I wanted to interview Seth MacFarlane, so I found the number for Fox in California and rung up.
Did you now?
You called them? The front desk at Fox and said, hello, can I speak to Seth MacFarlane, please? I went, who's calling? It's Nick Hudson here from Musical Talk Podcast. Hold, please. Then I get through to Seth MacFarlane's office and said, hello, can I speak to Seth, please? Sorry, who's... And I didn't realise you had to go through all this multitude of press companies in order to get these amazing people on. Sadly, you may notice, listener, it hasn't quite worked yet, but we might get there by episode 1000.
Well, with luck, you may yet manage to do it because Seth MacFarlane is a regular appearance... makes regular appearances at the Proms these days as a singer, doesn't he?
And he's still putting random Rodgers and Hart songs in episodes of Family Guy, which is brilliant.
I was going to say, you can never have enough Rodgers and Hart songs, random or otherwise. So yes, you're right. Those are particular skills. You've always, even for as long as I've known you, your interest has been much more focused. I mean, it's wide, but your focus has been on spectacular theatres. You know a lot. But you know a lot about theatres. You can say how many seats a West End theatre has got quite often. Well, certainly you'll have a rough idea of its size and what's its capabilities are and what it can do.
You know all about the rooms in Edinburgh.
And I know all about the dark rooms in Edinburgh, which sounds much more sinister, of course. Yes, you are quite right. But that's because you and I have very different interests. I mean, I haven't turned up in the story yet because we're not yet at episode 18. But over the years,
with us, listener.
But over the years, I have actually quite liked the fact that the programme offers very, very different approaches to musical theatre. You and I are utterly different people. We have utterly different interests. We just happen to live quite close to each other, and as a result of that, I hope
stand each other's company.
Well, that's not true. I do hope that we can bring differing elements and interest to the programme to make it varied. Because this is the thing I like about Musical Talk, is it always seems to me to be quite varied. You never quite know what the next episode's going to be. And when it comes...
Usually Gilbert and Sullivan.
No, it's not normally Gilbert and Sullivan. Gilbert and Sullivan has barely been mentioned this last year, but I will say that they are a valid part of musical theatre. But that's a good example also, the variety. If musical theatre starts...
Literally, variety.
Let's just say with music... Let's just say, wrongly, but it starts with Gilbert and Sullivan and comes up to now... That means we've already got a 150-year range, and we go through that range. We do programmes about 1920s musicals and about 1960s musicals and about what's on absolutely now and what's on at the Fringe and what's on in the West End and what was on in the Edwardian period and what you could have seen if you were listening to radio in the very first days of radio in the 20s. This, I like that. I like the fact if I was a listener to this programme, I would never know what I was going to get next. And that seems to have been something that you brought in at the very beginning, even if it was at a slightly smaller scale. How do we do lighting? What's a theatre? What's a theatre like for a performer, or an actor, or a singer?
And what's interesting is that, to go forward in time, but the most it's still tweeted about, and it was a question I always had: is what does a casting director do? So we went and interviewed Pippa Alien, and who's arguably the West End's premier casting director, and so many dramas. I think that's even on required listening at Arts Ed or something like that to talk about, to
learn
hear about
what they do.
And I like the fact that we're on university listening list, because that's amazing for anything.
Well, it makes us very Wreathian, to use the BBC's, educate, entertain and inform. Wreathian, as in
like Christmas wreaths.
Lord Wreath, one of the great broadcasters of our lifetime, or not indeed our lifetime, of ever.
Of your lifetime.
Yeah, very possibly. But seriously, the BBC's ethos of inform, educate and entertain is actually, I think, something that we try and do as well. So we're about 10, 15 episodes in. You've started bringing other people in. Of course, there was this time, wasn't it?
This is very weird for me. This is like an episode. I've never been interviewed by Thos before.
It's all about research and knowing your onions.
Yes. Actually not.
Hey, very funny.
I'm going to cry now.
So we've got a situation where I seem to remember that Andy, of course, being a performer, wasn't always available as well, which actually meant that you had to thrash around to find other people. So you've got Dom, you've got a couple of other people who came and did a few episodes. I arrived in episode 18 with Tim Saywood.
Thank God.
Well, I was going to say, talk to us about that period. How did that feel for you? Were you worried that the programme was actually going to come to its end? Because it was getting harder and harder for you, even after, say, 15 to 20 episodes, to find material or people?
Not really, because
or were you just thinking, more people to talk to?
Because I had more friends than Dom.
Yes, of course.
And I wasn't really bothered by it. I was doing my masters at the time.
In musical
I'll
theatre.
rephrase that. I was studying for my masters at the time, and it was a great year in my life because I met Tim and I was able to,
and many others,
and Robert Gordon as well.
Yeah.
I was able to really submerge myself in musical theatre and actually realise I didn't know very much at all.
When you say you don't know very much at all, do you mean in terms of the craft of making it, or in the terms of the history of it?
And the craft.
Oh, you mean the whole
it.
world of it?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
So it was great to be around with people that knew a lot more than I did, and Tim and I just kind of again had a good rapport, and he was always up for chatting, and I think I possibly reviewed shows with him that we went to see because we had to go and see shows on the master's course.
Well, that's where you and I first met, I'm sure,
Yeah.
because my recollection is that as part of your course, you had to go and see West End shows like Chicago and things like that.
Yeah.
And Tim knew that I love musical theatre anyway, and I was an old friend of Tim, so I was brought along to those even though I wasn't on the course or anything like that. So I got to see you and various other people in your year group. And we were watching shows, and of course in intervals and afterwards, you do talk about them. And of course, you and I realised we lived in Chiswick. So.
And then Tim told me you had a vested interest in hospital radio and things like that.
Vested interest is not the right word. I have a past in it. Yes.
You did hospital radio.
I did hospital wireless for 10 years
for the mental ward, and you had an interest in radio. So I thought, okay, let's get you.
I have a face for it. That's
Tim
right.
involved, and I believe we did a discussion about pantomime.
We did indeed. Quite a long one, I seem to remember.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't stop.
The tradition has continued on Musical Talk, talking about pantomime.
Well, certainly I'm very pleased because I consider pantomime to be one of the great forms of musical theatre, and it's very vibrant, but it's also, for so many people, the way they got into theatre in the first place.
I'm doing a pantomime at the moment, which is jolly good fun. What interests me about you and Tim is that you did real musical pantomimes, didn't you, with original songs?
Yes, he and I do have a history of having written a few shows.
Wonderful titles as The Hunchback of Notting Hill.
Which was a title which we never actually developed.
No.
Dracula, The Vampire Strikes Back,
Yes.
and Jekyll and Hyde Make Mine a Double.
Ali Baba and the Four Tea Leaves.
That's right, indeed, yes. Well, I'm very lucky that my shows are still revived.
Yes, more than my shows are, so congratulations.
Well, you're very kind. But that was still very early on in the history of musical talk. And how do you remember it working? Because for me, I have a view on how that, in a way, solidified the model of the programme that we still use today, which is essentially we somehow developed into two different production houses. I know it sounds a pretentious term, but actually it allowed us to... Well, it
Not
allowed...
tread on each other's toes.
Yes, and also it also meant that you
Or
didn't.
dance on each other's
we didn't
toes.
have to do an episode every week, or rather,
Yeah.
you would have a week off, and we would have a week off because somehow it became Tim and I plus you and others. I mean, obviously we overlapped a great deal, but that's how I remember it, and I think that's the model. I mean, we still use that.
And that
model
was-
today. You and I are the two producers, but we produce different programs in
Yeah.
different ways.
And meet twice a year.
Well, it seems to be, doesn't it? Quite. But do you remember how did that look from your point of view? You remember that process? I mean, I think it was very organic. I don't think we planned it.
I remember Tim and I and you went to Pizza Express, and Tim said, right, we're doing this, and this.
That does sound like Tim.
And we... Thos and I will produce episodes, and you will produce episode, and we will do it weekly.
Well, Tim is a very good organiser. When he
Yeah.
puts his mind to something, he can see
And I have
through
say,
to the core of things.
Your episodes with Tim still remain some of the funniest, and I mean that in the best
You're
way
very kind.
possible,
Yes.
some of the most entertaining listenings I've ever had with musical talk. Because I
you're
don't
very
listen to
kind.
my own episodes, obviously, because I've heard them before. But I
I
always,
try and listen to everybody's. I don't get to listen to them all, but
I
I
always
try.
enjoy the ones you do with Tim, and I hope there are many more to come.
Well, like all of us, we've all moved on in our lives. We are
Yeah.
now 10 years older than we ought to be. 10 years older than we ought to be. 10 years older than we used to
Speak for
be.
yourself.
Yes, but so none of us have got the time we used to have. But I do like that two production house model. I just think that's the secret.
Copyright musical talk.
Well, it doesn't. No, other people can use it because it doesn't cause any troubles, does it? But so in those after that period, because I remember certainly at the beginning when Tim and I joined, we would do episodes together, and then we more and more developed this idea of doing the separate production houses. But by then there was a sense of momentum to the programme, yes, that we knew that we were onto something, all of us, that this was a good thing. It was a success, that people were listening to us. Every month our listening figures go up. To this day, I think they're really rather remarkable at the moment, our listening figures.
It's over 1 million downloads, which is quite nice.
Yeah, not a week though, in fairness. I think we ought to say we're not out podcasting the BBC. Yes, but we do tremendously well. Many, many, many thousands per week per episode. So that's all very good as well. But when did you? By this stage, we were moving into the middle stage of the development of the program. From your point of view, you've nurtured your radio baby. It looks like it's going to prosper. How are you feeling about that? Did you think, "Oh, I'm really pleased," or did you think this is this is starting to become a bind, or what were your feelings at that time?
Don't know.
Oh, really?
I don't remember really having any negative feelings about it. I just
or positive ones.
I liked the ability to be able to see shows and talk about them with people. And the model I really liked, we first did for Lord of the Rings when
I wasn't in that one. How dare you?
It was Dom, Tim, Dom's girlfriend, and I. And other people possibly went to Lord of the Rings, the big theatrical event.
Yeah.
And we did a post-show discussion. We did two mid-show productions, because there were 2 intervals. So say 2 interviews then for 2 intervals. And then we did a post-show discussion. And I like that model because it's amazing to hear one's thoughts change over the course of an episode.
It's quite hard to do, though, isn't it? Because
yeah.
I can remember us doing something similar, I think, with one of the gala performances of Sweeney Todd that we all saw at the National Theatre. Was it Royal Festival Hall, actually, I think it was?
Yes, it was the Royal Festival Hall, and that was where, for example, Andrew Keating was there that evening. And
I think that's almost where he joined.
Yes, and Emma Williams was there that evening, whom we also brought on as a guest presenter, along with Martin Ball from Wicked.
Yeah, some good names.
And our lovely friend... there's a picture in my mind that I'm trying to sort out. The lovely, the American girl Rebecca that we've had on a couple of times over the past.
Was she called Rebecca Diamond?
Yes, Rebecca Diamond.
I liked her. She was fab. If you're out there, Rebecca, we love you.
She's just done the Walt Disney World Marathon, if you want to know.
Well, I'm very interested. I'm glad that she prospers.
She and her wife are happily married now, and congratulations to them. But it's funny how every single person I've met in my life from 2006 is because of this podcast. That is the best thing.
I'm guessing, therefore, you don't have your milk delivered.
No, that is the best thing I can bring out of this. And the fact that 10 years of, in a way, my life is documented.
I like that too. It's nice to go back to a conversation that you had, say, 5 years ago. Because who actually has that privilege of rehearing their own conversations?
I mean, Facebook sort of stores like one's life timeline, but
up to a point,
not in an audible way.
No, exactly.
And just to...
It's very immediate listening to a voice, isn't it?
I still pinch myself if I lie awake at night, or if I even just look through the episodes, the amount of people that we have talked to.
And the variety.
All because I had some stupid idea in my bedroom to start a podcast.
Oh, I'm glad you said that.
It
has gone well.
Yeah, it has gone well.
So here's the question then. Forgive me. When did you know it was a bona fide success and it was likely to last a long time?
When I was asked to the press junket for Sweeney Todd. That was the turning point. That was when we had 1,500 downloads in a day. Because
it was a big episode that, I remember. Yes, go
on. Johnny Depp, the late Alan Rickman, Stephen Sondheim, Tim Burton, Helena Bonham Carter, all in one episode.
Mm.
That was pretty cool, I will say. And also, to say we've had Alan Menken on 5 or 6 or 7 times, that's a big deal for me and a lot of our listeners, because that's, he's
Disney,
the voice of a generation.
Exactly. He's Disney man, and Disney is a way into musical theatre through musical film. Absolutely.
Well, you've long said they're the biggest producers of musical, the longest producers of musical theatre ever.
Since the 30s, yeah. No one else has been doing it for consistently and as well, and without gaps as they have. Yes, no, one was never ever diss Disney. Don't Disney. Put the diss into Disney. Yes, there we are. There's a song.
Put an E into it instead.
Disney? Disney know what he's talking about.
Oh, God.
And my apologies to anyone in Scotland
like
after that.
Lisa, for example, our lovely friend
Oh,
Lisa,
yes, absolutely.
who's just had a child.
Has she?
She has, so congratulations,
Yes.
Lisa, if you're still listening. It's great to go back and look
It's
at
become a family in a strange way, hasn't it?
Yeah. Very, very, very big, far.
And some people have gone a long way away from it, but, anyone's almost welcome to come back at any time. And because a new voice is always interesting to hear. For me, I agree with so much of what you've said, but it's a privilege to meet so many people. One of the things I love in Edinburgh, not just Edinburgh, elsewhere, but Edinburgh is where it feels most profound. Then if you like a show, you can go up to someone afterwards and say, I would like to talk to you about that show. Now, in Britain,
and
of course...
And you do, don't you,
And
Thos?
I do, indeed. My word, I do. I'm unstoppable. But I do...
The real-time coverage of Thos's 5 weeks in Edinburgh.
I'm genuinely worried that the next Edinburgh Fringe will start before I finish this year's coverage. But seriously, I do... in Britain... You need a license to introduce yourself to someone. You can't just go up to anyone, and say, let's talk.
I can.
Well, I know you can, old chap, but your face has always been faced towards America. You have some of their ability to break down sociability. In my case, and like a lot of us, I might like a show, but the idea of going up to somebody afterwards years ago when I was a younger man, going up to someone after a show and saying, I really enjoyed that, let's talk about it. Impossible. It wasn't, you don't introduce yourselves
As
on
it was
spec.
for me, I was incredibly shy back then.
Yes, you were. I remember, actually, in those early days. Although, forgive me, you have, we've all matured as people. And as you say, you've developed that skill set, which is really paying you off, even now, tremendously well in meeting new people and getting me in on big productions. But I like that license that it's given us. And I hope that license that we've been given by Musical Talk has entertained other people. It seems to have done. So when did you know that it wasn't likely to be stopping anytime soon? Or what, did you just never have that thought and it just keeps rolling on?
Just keeps rolling on. As I said,
I like Old Man River. We're going to take her back to Showboat.
I will say the last year is when it's been most difficult, if I am to
be honest, it's 10 years in, yeah.
And that's purely because the West End has been a bit bad. It's not our fault.
No. It's been a much less fascinating West End for a while.
It's just how many jukebox musicals do we need?
I'll give you the answer to that. It's quite a low number.
And we've talked about them before. And it's because I've been doing a lot more work that does involve me sitting at the computer working on audio or working on music and stuff. I'm, as everyone knows, my other love is theme parks, so I'm very lucky to be able to say my music is always playing at Alton Towers, it's always playing at Chessington, it's always playing in Mexico and Malaysia.
You are indeed Coaster Boy.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, blimey.
Remember that? Yes.
Yes, sadly. The sad thing is you do as well, Thos. But it's got a lot harder for me to push out content, and I want to change that for the future of Musical Talk. I want to get back into the joy that I've had, and
you may have to go slightly outside of the West End for that. Yeah.
But what you're brilliant at is, I'm always amazed when I get an email from Thos saying, "Here's an episode, and it's 2 hours long," and
it's me painting a wall.
I do sit there and think, how the hell does Thos do that? So my question for you, Thos, is how the hell do you do that?
Well, I don't have an answer to that, except
I listened to an episode yesterday that was the second April Fool episode that you did.
Is that Raiders of the Lost Archives?
Yeah, Jonathan Cohen and I were falling about laughing at Michael Parkinson interviewing Andrew Lloyd Webber, and we just had this vision of you in your house doing impressions of all these people, like Kenny. Was it Kenny Everett?
Kenny Everett was there. Yeah, he interviewed Julie Andrews.
Michael Parkinson and things. You must have so much more fun than I do.
Oh, I wouldn't say that necessarily, but
you're a lot more creative in your episodes than I.
We bring different things to the table, though. We absolutely bring different things to the table. You absolutely slip in perfectly with the great American composers. I've had the privilege of meeting a few of them. I mean, I still consider Charles Strauss to be one of the nicest people I've ever met, and I'm so proud of those interviews I did with him, both sort of live as an audience and personally one-on-one in a hotel in London. That was wonderful to me. But, well, I'm going to give you a very quick answer to your question, how the hell do I do it? Actually, that's 10 years of hospital radio. Because I did hospital radio, but I wasn't a disc jockey. I didn't present records. I did present records, but that was only incidental.
You didn't talk to Lyric, for example.
No, but I wrote comedy.
Yeah.
what I wrote was very bad comedy, but by the time I'd finished doing it for 10 years, I wrote slightly better comedy. And I
Slightly
also
better bad comedy.
yes, actually,
And now,
that's a nice
10 years
way.
of musical talk, you're just doing slightly better comedy.
I've achieved my ambition of being average. But seriously,
I'm still waiting for that.
oh no, I think you do tremendously well. But I think it is a case that I've always been fascinated by the opportunities that the audio medium can give you, and that was something I always used to experiment with before musical talk. And so
Me too. I've always been fascinated by audio production and stuff.
Yeah.
And
well, you create music. You're creative in that sense. You can do stuff I simply can't. I don't. I love music, but I can't do it. You can do it, and you know how to record it, and you know how to arrange it, and you know how to tweak it when you need to. So those are all great creative skills. I can't do that, but I can just take the sound I've heard and I can tweak and twiddle if that seems to me to be a useful and sensible thing. I couldn't do too many April Fool's episodes. I'm very glad that the way the calendar works, I only have to do one every 6 years. But I've got next time's one planned. It's not recorded, but it's planned. But thank you very much for your kind comments.
No, it's just, and do go back and listen to it. It is episode of the Lost Archives.
It's a bit rude, that one, I seem to remember.
No, but it's good British pantomime humour.
I'd go as far as to say smut, but it's very kind of you.
Yes. Smart or smut?
Smut, yeah, sadly. So what now then for musical talk? Because obviously you and I are planning to continue doing musical talk, and we enjoy it, and I enjoy these conversations together, and I enjoy the conversations we have with different people apart. I like the method and the process and the enjoyment the programme gives me.
I think me as a fan of technology think it would be very interesting to experiment, as the great Cole Porter once said.
He did in Nymph Errant, if we're showing off our historic roots.
With what we can do nowadays, for example, live broadcasts, I think, is a big thing that is an interesting medium. I'd like to do more audience recording in front of an audience.
Well, we've always spoken about doing that, haven't we?
Yeah.
We haven't done nearly enough.
And we've been talking to the Theatre Cafe, which is a new place that's opened up in London, sort of. I've always thought London needed a theatre cafe, which is a good thing there is, and they're very happy to let us go and record there. So that might be something to look into for the future.
Certainly.
I'd like to get more new voices on the show.
I think we're both agreed on that.
Possibly for you and I to write a song live on Musical Talk. I think that would be quite fun. I just want to try and experiment.
Do different things.
Yeah.
Yes. More of the same plus new things on top.
Possibly some video footage. It's a huge. The world has changed so much in 10 years.
Well, no one talks about the word vodcast anymore, do they?
No.
But we did do one for West End Live about 1,000 years ago.
We've done a couple. And yeah, I mean, for example, I just remembered I'd been on the red carpet at the Olivier Awards and we were able to talk to people there. I like to do that again. I think that would be a wonderful opportunity for the show. But it's all really down. What I would most like is you, listener, to get in touch with us more and tell us what you want to hear. Because it's all very well for Thos and me to come up with ideas, but if you're not interested in them...
how dare you? How dare you?
Or if there is one that you are interested in, you want us to revisit, maybe. Because that's what's also great about... as I've always said, Musical Talk is always able to go on because the musical always...
does.
Yeah, as Sondheim says, it's never written, it's only rewritten.
Yeah.
So...
I don't know, I may have finished my hat. I shall now eat it. Carry on.
So it's really down to it's all. I mean, yes, it is down to Thos and me and all our other friends we have involved. But I would like to hear more from the listeners about what you.
Well, we are an open book, aren't we?
If you've seen a show, tell us about it. Email us, tweet us, Facebook us. I hate how tweet is now a verb and not a.
But you seem perfectly happy with Facebook as a verb.
Yeah.
I think maybe you're picking on the wrong one there. Contact is the word we're after. Yes.
What's the old-fashioned word?
Please communicate.
Yes. Please, do get in touch.
Send us a passenger pigeon immediately.
And
which we shall then eat.
I'd also like to again look at drama talk, seriously look at opera talk, and look at other things that we can really expand out into other mediums.
And we would be looking for other people to join us on those. Yes. So.
And what about you, Thos?
Well, I agree with all of that.
Ditto.
I've always thought, personally, I thought that musical talk... I was so pleased when we ran drama talk for a short while with Dom Lindsay Beaton. And I really enjoyed that. And the only reason that didn't continue is because it didn't adopt the 2 production house process.
Yeah.
It became too much for Dom, and so it sort of wound down, regrettably, after only 18 episodes, I think it was. Something like that.
Do we still have those episodes?
I do.
Right.
So
I might want to put them on YouTube or something.
I would be delighted to do that. I think that would be lovely. And I would like to get back into the swing of that. I don't know how much you and I would ever be in a position to contribute to that, except occasionally. But yes, musical talk, drama talk, and I always thought that cinema talk had this good ring to it as well.
Talky talk.
Well, indeed, this is one of my particular bugbears, and this is a complete
sideshow. Moving pictures now.
I detest the word movie. I think
because talky talk is quite good.
Because yes, we've moved on from moving pictures to talkies. So when people talk about going to the movies, they are going to the kinema or possibly the cinema.
The kinematograph.
Yes, exactly. But I do detest the word
doesn't
movie.
have the same ring to it, though.
It does in my world. So that's possibly the future for us then, expanding into a few other genres with some of our listeners joining in with us. So I suspect we would be open for 10-minute templates of people providing us with
as long
concepts.
as you want it to be.
Yes.
You know, if it's 90 seconds. If you get out of the theatre and you are so overjoyed or angry or medium in your thoughts...
or anywhere in between, yes.
Yes. Get out your phone that everyone has on you, open the voice memo app, record your thoughts and email them to feedback@musicaltalk.co.uk, and you may find yourself on the podcast. I think it's a brilliant, embrace the technology, Thos.
But I have a lovely Bakelite phone. I don't understand how you're
talking.
You and
your Marconi device.
Absolutely. Well, Nick, it's been wonderful talking to you, as it always is, but it's been really nice to sort of analyse...
Who's the band to close off this episode of Parkinson, of Ribbits?
Well, if it was Parkinson, it'd be normally somebody like Norrie Paramore, I think. But it's been lovely talking to you and, in the nicest possible way, probing you about your past.
Yes. That's past.
Yes.
It's been lovely talking to you too, Thos.
Talking out of your past, that's right.
Yes, my past times. And thank you very much.
I'll see you in episode 1000.
Yes, clink, clink to the future of musical talk.
Clink, clink. Musical talk. Well, there we are. That was Nick Hudson chatting to me about the early days of musical talk and how it came to be created, and possibly how it's continued. I found it quite fascinating because there was a lot of stuff in there that I didn't know. So the only problem left for me now is to work out what this episode's going to be called. We could call it Tenure. We could call it In the Nick of Time, It's the Time of Nick. Or we could call it Look, I Made a Chat, for all of you who know your Sondheim references. But if you've listened to this episode already, you've probably seen what I've decided to go with anyway. So there's no surprise. There we are, an anticlimax, a totally expected result to any episode which I've fronted. So, with that dismal taste of disappointment in your mouth, I think it must be time to say farewell for this week. And not before time, I can hear you say. You're very, very rude. So, for that, I'm going. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk, presented by Thos Ribbits and Nick Hudson, and edited by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2017. To find out more about the world of musical talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our brand new website, musicaltalkpodcast.weebly.com, or subscribe to us on iTunes, and follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, at musicaltalkthos.
Welcome to this week's episode of Musical Talk. My name's Nick Hudson, sitting across from Thos Ribbits.
Thank you for that splendid afterthought. That's right, Thos Gap Ribbits, that's
Yes.
me. Yes, quite one of the Gap Ribbitses.
The famous Gat Ribbits.
That's easy for you to say.
The great Gats Ribbitsby.
Not as great as all that.
No.